Hello and welcome to India Reads. My name is Pradeep and we're reading The Story of My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi. We are in part 3 of the book, section 41, Cochlear's Charity. So let's start. I have already referred to the attack of pleurisy I had in England. Gokhale returned to London soon after. Callenbank and I used to regularly go to him. Our talks were mostly about the war, and as Callenbank had the geography of Germany at his fingertips and had travelled much in Europe, he used to show him on the map the various places in connection with the war. When I got pleurisy, this also became a topic of daily discussion. My dietetic experiments were going on then. My diet consisted, among other things, of groundnuts, ripe and unripe bananas, lemon, olive oil, tomatoes, and grapes. I completely eschewed milk, cereals, pulses, and other things. Dr. Jivraj Mehta treated me. He pressed me hard to resume milk and cereals, but I was obdurate. The matter reached Cochlear's ears. He had not much regard for my reasoning in favor of a fruitarian diet, and he wanted me to take whatever the doctor prescribed for my health. It was not an easy thing for me to not yield to Gokhale's pressure. When he would not take a refusal, I begged him to give me 24 hours for thinking over the question. As Callenbank and I returned home that evening, we discussed where my duty lay. He had been with me in my experiment. He liked it, but I saw that he was agreeable to my giving up if my health demanded it. So I had to decide for myself according to the dictats of my inner voice. I spent the whole night thinking over the matter. To give up the experiment would mean renouncing all my ideas in that direction, and yet I found no flaw in them. The question was how far should I yield to Gokhale's loving pressure and how far I might modify my experiment in the so-called interest of health. I finally decided to adhere to the experiment insofar as the motive behind was chiefly religious, and to yield to the doctor's advice where the motive was mixed. Religious considerations had been predominant in giving up milk. I had before me a picture of the wicked process the Govas in Calcutta adopted to extract the last drop of milk from their cows and buffaloes. I also had the feeling that just as meat was not man's food, so even animals' milk could not be man's food. So I got up in the morning with the determination to adhere to my resolve to abstain from milk. This greatly relieved me. I dreaded to approach Gokhale, but I trusted him to respect my decision. In the evening, Callenbank and I called on Gokhale at the National Liberal Club. The first question he asked me was, "Well, have you decided to accept the doctor's advice?" I gently but firmly replied, "I am willing to yield on all the points except one about which I beg you not to press me. I will not take milk, milk products, or meat. If not to take these things should mean my bad death, I feel I better face it." "Is that a final decision?" asked Gokhale. "I'm afraid I cannot decide otherwise," said I. "I know that my decision will pain you, but I beg your forgiveness." With a certain amount of pain, but with deep affection, Gokhale said, "I do not approve of your decision. I do not see any religion in it, but I will not press you any more." With these words, he turned to Dr. Jivraj Mehta and said, "Please do not worry him anymore. Prescribe anything you like within the limit that he has set for himself." The doctor expressed dissent but was helpless. He advised me to take moong soup with a dash of asafoetida in it. To this I agreed. I took it for a day or two, but it increased my pain. As I did not find it suitable, I went back to fruits and nuts. The doctor, of course, went on with his external treatment. The latter somewhat relieved my pain, but my restrictions were to him a sore handicap. Meanwhile, Gokhale left for home as he could not stand the October fogs of London. The treatment of pleurisy. The persistence of the pleurisy caused some anxiety, but I knew that the cure lay not in taking medicine internally but in dietetic changes assisted by external remedies. I called in Dr. Allison of vegetarian fame, who treated diseases by dietetic modification and whom I had met in 1890. He thoroughly overhauled me. I explained to him how I had pledged myself not to take milk. He cheered me up and said, "You need not take milk. In fact, I want you to do without any fat for some days." He then advised me to live on plain brown bread, raw vegetables such as beet, radish, onion, and other tubers and greens, and also fresh fruit, mainly oranges. The vegetables were not to be cooked but merely grated fine if I could not masticate them. I adopted this for about 3 days, but the raw vegetables did not quite suit me. My body was not in a condition to enable me to do full justice to the experiment. I was nervous about taking raw vegetables. Dr. Allinson also advised me to keep all the windows of my room open for the whole 24 hours. bathe in tepid water, have an oil massage on the affected parts, and walk in the open for 15 to 30 minutes. I liked all these suggestions. My room had French windows, which, if I kept open, would let the rain in. The fan light could not be opened. I therefore got the glass broken so as to let in fresh air, and I partially opened the windows in a manner not to let in rain. All these measures somewhat improved my health but did not completely cure me. Lady Cecilia Roberts occasionally called on me. We became friends. She wanted very much to persuade me to take milk, but I was unyielding. She hunted about for a substitute for milk. Some friends suggested to her that her malted milk, assuring her unknowingly that it was absolutely free from milk and that it was a chemical preparation with all the properties of milk. Lady Cecilia, I knew, had great regard for my religious scruples, and so I implicitly trusted her. I dissolved the powder in water and took it only to find that it tasted just like milk. I read the label on the bottle only to find too late that it was preparation of milk, so I gave it up. I informed Lady Cecilia about the discovery, asking her not to worry about it. She came post haste to me to say how sorry she was. Her friend had not read the label at all. I begged her not to be anxious and expressed my regret that I could not avail myself of the thing she had procured with so much trouble. I also assured her that I did not feel upset or guilty over having taken milk under misapprehension. I must skip over many other sweet reminiscences of my contact with Lady Cecilia. I could think of many friends who have been a source of great comfort to me in the midst of trials and disappointments. One who has faith reads in them the merciful providence of God, who thus sweetens. So we got interrupted, but we'll start from where we left, which is about his contact with Lady Cecilia. Uh, I must skip over many other sweet reminiscences of my contact with Lady Cecilia. I could think of many friends who have been a source of great comfort to me in the midst of trials and disappointments. One who has faith reads in them the merciful providence of God, who thus sweetens sorrow itself. Dr. Allison, when he called next, relaxed his restrictions and permitted me to have groundnut butter or olive oil for the sake of fat, and to take the vegetables cooked. I choose if I choose with rice. These changes were quite welcome, but as they were far from giving me complete cure, very careful nursing was still necessary, and I was obliged to keep mostly in bed. Dr. Mehta occasionally looked in to examine me and held out a standing offer to cure me if only I would listen to his advice. Whilst things were going on in his way, Mr. Roberts one day came to see me and urged me very strongly to go home. You cannot possibly go to Netley in this condition. There is still severer cold ahead of us. I would strongly advise you to get back to India, for it is only there that you can be completely cured. If after recovery you should find that the war is still going on, you will have many opportunities there of rendering help. As it is, I do not regard what you have already done by any means a mean contribution. By any means, a mean contribution. I accepted his advice and began to make preparations for returning to India. Homeward. Mr. Callenbank had accompanied me to England with a view of going to India. We were staying together and, of course, wanted to sail by the same boat. Germans, however, were under strict surveillance that we had our doubts about Mr. Callenbank getting a passport. I did my best to get it, and Mr. Roberts, who was in favor of his getting his passport, sent a cable to the Viceroy in his behalf. But straight came Lord Hardinge's reply: regret the Government of India not prepared to take any such risk. All of us understood the force of the reply. It was a great wrench for me to part from Mr. Callenbank, but I could see that his pang was greater. Could he have come to India, he would have been leading today the simple, happy life of a farmer and weaver. Now he is in South Africa leading his old life and doing brisk business as an architect. We wanted a third class passage, but as there was none available on P&O boats, we had to go second. We took with us the dried fruit that we carried from South Africa, as most of it would not be procurable on board where fresh fruit was available. Dr. Jeevraj Mehta had bandaged my ribs with meds plaster and asked me not to remove it till we reached the Red Sea. For 2 days I put up with the discomfort, but finally it became too much for me. It was with considerable difficulty that I managed to undo the plaster and and regain the liberty of having a proper wash and bath. My diet consisted mostly of nuts and fruits. I found that I was improving every day and felt much better by the time we entered the Suez Canal. I was weak but not felt entirely out of danger, and I gradually went on increasing my exercise. The improvement I attributed largely to pure air of the temperate zone. Whether it was due to past experience or any other reason, I do not know, but the kind of distance I noticed between English and Indian passengers on the boat was something I had not observed even on my voyage from South Africa. I did talk to a few Englishmen, but the talk was mostly formal. There were hardly any cordial conversations as such as had certainly taken place on the South African boats. The reason for this was, I think, to be found in the conscious or unconscious feeling at the back of the Englishman's mind that he belonged to the ruling race, and the feeling at the back of the Indian's mind that he belonged to the subject race. I was eager to reach home and get free from this atmosphere. On arrival at Eden, we had already begun to feel somewhat at home. We knew the Edenwalas very well, having met Mr. Kekobath Kawasji Dinshaw in Durban and come in close contact with him and his wife. A few days more and we reached Bombay. It was such a joy to get back to homeland after an exile of 10 years. Gokhale had inspired a reception for me in Bombay, where he had come in spite of his delicate health. I had approached India in the ardent hope of merging myself in him and thereby feeling free, but fate had willed me otherwise. Some reminiscence of the bar. Before coming to a narrative of the course of my life, Before coming to a narrative of the course my life took in India, it seems necessary to recall few of the South African experience which I have deliberately left out. Some lawyer friends have asked me to give reminiscences of the bar. The number of these is so large that if I were to describe them all, they would occupy a volume by themselves and take me out of my scope. But it may not be perhaps improper to recall some of those which bear upon the practice of truth. So far as I can recollect, I have already said that I have never resorted to untruth in my profession, and that a large part of my legal practice was in the interest of public work, for which I charged nothing beyond the out-of-pocket expenses, and these two I sometimes made myself. I had thought that in saying this I had said all that was necessary as regard to my legal practice. But friends want me to do more. They seem to think that if I describe, however slightly, some of the occasions where I refuse to swerve from the truth, the legal profession might profit from it. As a student, I had the heard that the lawyer's profession was a liar's profession, but this did not influence me. I had no intention of earning either position or money by lying. My principle was put to test many a time in South Africa. Often I knew that my opponents had tutored their witnesses, and if only I encouraged my client or his witness to lie, we could win the case. But I have always resisted the temptation. I remember on one occasion where after having won the case, I suspected that my client had deceived me. In my heart of hearts, I always wished that I should win only if my client's case was right. In fixing my fees, I do not recall ever having made them conditional on my winning the case. Whether my client won or lost, I expected nothing more or less than my fees. I want every new client at the outset that he should not expect me to take up a false case or coach the witnesses. With the result that I built up such a reputation that no false cases used to come to me. Indeed, some of my clients would keep their clean cases for me and take the doubtful ones elsewhere. There was one case which proved a severe trial. It was brought to me by one of my best clients. It was a case of highly complicated accounts and had been a prolonged one. It had been heard in parts before several courts. Ultimately, the bookkeeping portion of it was entrusted by the court to the arbitration of some qualified accountants. The award was entirely in favor of my client, but the arbitrators had inadvertently committed an error in which calculation, however small, was serious, inasmuch as entry which ought to have been on the debit side was made on the credit side. The opponents had opposed the award on other grounds. I was a junior counsel for my client. When the senior counsel became aware of the error, he was of the opinion that our client was not bound to admit it. He was clearly of the opinion that no counsel was bound to admit anything that went against his client's interest. He said that we ought to admit for error. I said that we ought to admit for error. But the senior counsel contended, in that case, there is every likelihood of the court cancelling the whole award, and no sane counsel would imperil the client's case to that extent. At any rate, I would be the last man to take any such risk if the case were to be sent up for a fresh hearing. One could never tell what expenses our client might have to incur and what the ultimate result might be. The client was present when this conversation took place. I said, I feel that both our client and we ought to run the risk. Where is the certainty of the court upholding the wrong award because we do not admit to the error? And supposing the admission were to bring the client to grief, what harm is there? But why should we make the admission at all? Asked the senior counsel. Where is the surety of the court not detecting the error or our opponent not discovering it? Said I. Well then, will you argue the case? I am not prepared to argue it on your behalf or on your terms, replied the senior counsel with decision. I humbly answered, if you will not argue, then I am prepared to do so, if our client so desires. I have nothing to do with the case if the error is not admitted. With this, I looked at my client. He was a little embarrassed. I had been in the case from the very first. The client fully trusted me and knew me through and through. He said, well, then you will argue the case and let's admit the error. Let us lose if that is to be our lot. God defend the right. I was delighted. I had expected nothing less from him. The senior counsel again warned me, pitied me for my obdurance and congratulated me all the same. What happened in court we shall see in the next chapter. Sharp practice. I had no doubt about the soundness of my advice, but I doubted very much my fitness to doing full justice to the case. I felt it would be most hazardous undertaking to argue such a difficult case before the Supreme Court, and I appeared before the bench in trembling and fear. As soon as I referred to the error in accounts, one of the judges said, is it not a sharp practice, Mr. Gandhi? I boiled within to hear this charge. It was intolerable to be accused of sharp practice when there was not a slightest warrant for it. With a judge prejudiced from the start like this, there is little chance of success in a difficult case, I said to myself, but I composed my thoughts and answered. I'm surprised that your lordship should suspect sharp practice without hearing me out. No question of a charge, said judge. It was merely a suggestion. The suggestion here seems to me to amount to a charge. I would ask your lordship to hear me out and then arraign me if there is any occasion for it. I'm sorry to have interrupted you, replied the judge. Pray do go on with your explanation of the discrepancy. I had enough material in support of my explanation. Thanks to the judge having raised the question, I was able to revert the court's attention on my argument from the very start. I felt much encouraged and took the opportunity of entering into a detailed explanation. The court gave me a patient hearing and I was able to convince the judge that the discrepancy was entirely due to advertence. They therefore did not feel disposed to cancel the whole award, which had involved considerable labor. The opposing counsel seemed to have felt secure in the belief that not much argument would be needed after the error had been admitted. But the judges continued to interrupt him and they were convinced that the error was a slip which could be easily rectified. The counsel labored hard to attack the award, but the judge who had originally started with the suspicion had now come around definitely to my side. Supposing Mr. Gandhi had not admitted the error, what would you have done? He asked. It was impossible for us to secure the services of a more competent and honest expert accountant than the one appointed by us. The court must presume that you know your case best. If you cannot point out anything beyond the slip which any expert accountant is liable to commit, the court will be loath to compel the parties to go in for a fresh litigation and fresh expenses because of a patent mistake. We may not order a fresh hearing when such an error can be easily corrected, continued the judge. And so the counsel's objection was overruled. The court either confirmed the award with the error rectified or ordered the arbitrator to rectify the error, I forgot which. I was delighted. So were my client and senior counsel. I was confirmed in my conviction that it was not impossible to practice law without compromising the truth. Let the reader, however, remember that even truthfulness in the practice of the profession cannot cure it of its fundamental defect that vitiates it. Clients turned co-workers. The distinction between the legal practice in Natal and that in Transvaal was that in Natal there was a joint bar. A barrister, whilst he admitted to the rank of advocate, could also practice as an attorney, whereas in Transvaal, as in Bombay, the spheres of the attorney and the advocates were different. A barrister had the right of election whether he would practice as an advocate or as an attorney. So, whilst in Natal I was admitted as an advocate, in Transvaal I sought admission as an attorney. For an advocate, I could not have come in direct contact with the Indians, and the white attorneys in South Africa would not have briefed me. But even in Transvaal, it was open to the attorneys to appear before the magistrate. On one occasion, while I was conducting a case before a magistrate in Johannesburg, I discovered that my client had deceived me. I saw him completely break down in the witness box, so without any argument, I asked the magistrate to dismiss the case. The opposing counsel was astonished and the magistrate was pleased. I rebuked my client for bringing a false case to me. He knew that I never accepted false cases, and when I brought the thing home to him, he admitted his mistake. And I have an impression that he was not angry with me for having asked the magistrate to decide against him. At any rate, my conduct in the case did not affect my practice for the worse. Indeed, it made my work easier. I saw that my devotion to truth enhanced my reputation among the members of the profession. In spite of the handicap of color, I was able, in some cases, to win even their affection. During my professional work, it was also my habit never to conceal my ignorance from the clients or my colleagues. Whenever I felt myself at sea, I would advise my client to consult some other counsel, or if he preferred to stick to me, I would ask him to seek the assistance of a senior counsel. The frankness earned me with the unbounded affection and trust of my clients. They were always willing to pay the fee whenever consultation with senior counsel was necessary. The affection and trust served me in good stead in my public work. I have indicated in the foregoing chapters that my object in practicing in South Africa was a service to the community. Even for this purpose, winning the confidence of the people was an indispensable condition. The large-hearted Indians magnified into service professional work done for money, and when I advised them to suffer their hardships of imprisonment for the sake of their rights, many of them cheerfully accepted the advice, not much because they had reasoned with the correctness of the course, as because of their confidence in and affection for me. As I write, sorry, I have jumped pages now. Yeah, as I read, many a sweet reminiscence comes to my mind. Hundreds of clients became friends and real co-workers in public service, and their association sweetened a life that was otherwise full of difficulties and dangers. How a client was saved. The reader by now will be familiar with Parsi Rustamji's name. He was the one who at once became my client and co-worker, or perhaps it would be truer to say that he first became my co-worker and then a client. I won his confidence to such an extent that he sought and followed my advice also in private domestic matters. Even when he was ill, he would seek my aid, and though there was much difference between our ways of living, he did not hesitate to accept my quack treatment. This friend once got into a very bad scrape. Though he kept me informed of most of his affairs, he had studiously kept back one thing. He was a large importer of goods from Bombay and Calcutta, and not infrequently he resorted to smuggling. But as he was on the best terms with customs officials, no one was inclined to suspect him. In charging duty, they used to take his invoices on trust. Some may have some might even have connived at the smuggling. But to use the telling smile of the Gujarati poet Akho, theft like quicksilver won't be suppressed, and Parsi Rustamji's proved no exception. The good friend ran post haste to me, tears rolling down his cheeks as he said, Bhai, I have deceived you. My guilt has been discovered today. I have smuggled and I am doomed. I must go to jail and be ruined. You alone may be able to save me from this predicament. I have kept back nothing else from you, and I thought I ought not to bother you for such tricks of the trade, and so I never told you about the smuggling. But now, how much I repented. I calmed down and said, to save or not to save you is in his hands. As to me, You know my way. I can but try to save you by means of a confession. The good Parsi felt deeply mortified. It is not my confession, is not my confession before you enough? You have wronged not me but the government. How will the confession made before me avail you? I replied gently. Of course I will do just as you advise, but you will you not consult with my old counsel, Mr. He is a friend too, said Parsi Rustamji. They have not mentioned Mr. who it is. Inquiry revealed that the smuggling had been going on for a long time. The actual offence detected involved a trifling sum. We went to his counsel. He pursued the papers and said that this case will be tried by a jury, and a natal jury will be the last to acquit an Indian. But I will not give up hope. I did not know this counsel. Immediately, Pasi Rasamji intercepted. I thank you, but I would like to be guided by Mr. Gandhi's advice in this case. He knows me intimately. Of course, you will advise him whenever necessary. Having thus shelved the counsel's question, we went to Parsi Rustamji's shop. And now, explaining my view, I said to him, I don't think this case should be taken to court at all. It rests with the customs office to prosecute you or to let you go, and he will in turn will have to be guided by the attorney general. I am prepared to meet both. I propose that you should offer to pay the penalty they fix, and the odds are that they will be agreeable. If they are not, then you must be prepared to go to jail. I am of the opinion that the shame lies not in so much in going to jail as in committing the offense. The deed of shame has already been done. Imprisonment you should regard as penance. The real penance is in resolving never to smuggle again. I cannot say that Pasi Rustamji took this all quite well. He was a brave man, but courage failed him for a moment. For the moment, his name and fame were at stake, and where would he be if the edifice he had reared with such care and labor should go into pieces? I am sorry again. Well, as I've told you, he said that I am entirely in your hands. You may do just as you like. I brought to bear on this case all my powers of persuasion. I met the customs office and fearlessly apprised him of the whole affair. I also promised to place all the books at his disposal and told him how penitent Pasi Rustamji was feeling. The customs officer said, I like the old Pasi. I am sorry that he has made a fool of himself. You know where my duty lies. I must be guided by the Attorney General, and so I would advise you to use all your persuasion with him. I shall be thankful, said I, if you do not insist on dragging him to court. Having got him to promise this, I entered into correspondence with the Attorney General, also met him. I am glad to say that he appreciated my complete frankness and was convinced that I had kept back nothing. I now forget whether it was in connection with this or some other case that my persistence and frankness exhorted him from the remark, I see you will never take no for an answer. The case against Parsi Rustamji was compromised. He was to pay penalty equal to thrice the amount he had confessed to having smuggled. Parsi Rustamji, having reduced to writing the facts of the whole case, got the paper framed and hung up in his office as a personal reminder to heirs and fellow merchants. These friends of Rustamji warned me not to be taken by this transitory contribution. When I told Rustamji about this warning, he said, what would be my faith if I deceived you? So we've come to the end of chapter 4. I'm going to spend another 5-10 minutes reading chapter 5. Let's get started. Part 5. The first experience. Before I reached home, the party which had started from Phoenix had already arrived. According to our original plan, I was to have preceded them, but my preoccupation in England with the war upset all our calculation. And when I saw that I had to be detained in England indefinitely, I was faced with the question of finding a place for accommodating the Phoenix party. I wanted them to all stay together, if possible, and to live the life they had left at Phoenix. They had led at Phoenix. I did not know of any ashram which I could recommend them to, and therefore cabled them to meet Andrews and do as he advised. And so they were first put up in Gurukul Kangri, where the late Swami Shraddhanand ji treated them as his own children, children. After this, they were put up in the Shantiniketan ashram where the poet and his people showed similar love upon them. The experiences that they gathered in both the places too stood them and me in good stead. The poet Shraddhananji and Principal Sushil Rudra, as I used to say to Andrews, composed his Trinity. When in South Africa, he was never tired of speaking to them, and of my many sweet memories of South Africa, Mr. Andrews' talks day in and day out of this great Trinity are amongst the sweetest and most vivid. Mr. Andrews naturally put up the Phoenix Party in touch with Sushil Rudra. Principal Rudra had no ashram, but he had a home which he completely placed at the disposal of the Phoenix family. Within a day of their arrival, the people made them feel so thoroughly at home that they did not miss Phoenix at all. It was only when I landed in Bombay that I learned that the Phoenix party was at Shantiniketan. I was therefore impatient to meet them as soon as I could after my meeting with Gokhale. The receptions in Bombay gave me an occasion for offering what might be called Little Satyagraha. At the party given in my honor at Mr. Jahangir Petit's palace, I did not dare to speak in Gujarati in those palatial surroundings of dazzling splendor. I, who had lived the best part of the best life among indentured laborers, felt myself a complete rustic. With my Kathiawadi cloak, turban, and dhoti, I looked somewhat more civilized than I do today, but the pomp and the splendor of Mr. Petit's mansion made me feel absolutely out of my element. However, one second. However, I acquitted myself tolerably well, having taken shelter under Mr. Firoz Shah's protective wing. Uh, then there was the Gujarati function. The Gujaratis would not let me go without a reception, which was organized by the late Uttam Lal Trivedi. I had to acquaint myself with the program beforehand. Mr. Jinnah was present, being a Gujarati. I forget whether as president, or as a principal speaker. He made a short and sweet little speech in English. As far as I remember, most of the other speeches were also in English. When my turn came, I expressed my thanks in Gujarati, explaining my partiality for Gujarati and Hindustani, and entering my humble protest against the use of English in a Gujarati gathering. This I did not with some hesitation, for I was afraid lest it should be considered discourteous for an inexperienced man returned home after a long exile to enter his protest against the established practices. But no one seemed to misunderstand my insistence on replying in Gujarati. In fact, I was glad to make note that everyone seemed reconciled to my protest. The meeting thus emboldened me to think that I should not find it difficult to place my newfangled notions about my countrymen. After a brief stay in Bombay, full of these preliminary experiences, I went to Pune where Gokhale had summoned me. With Gokhale in Pune, the moment I reached Bombay, Gokhale sent me a word that the governor was desirous of seeing me, and that it might be proper for me to respond before I left for Pune. Accordingly, I called on His Excellency. After the usual inquiries, he said, I ask one thing of you. I would like you to come and see me whenever you propose I take any steps concerning government. I replied, I can very easily give the promises, inasmuch as it is my rule as a satyagrahi to understand the viewpoint of the party I propose to deal with and to try to agree with him as far as possible. I strictly observe the rule in South Africa, and I mean to do the same here. Lord Wellington thanked me and said, you may come to me whenever you like, and you will see that my government is not willingly doing anything wrong. To which I replied, it is that faith that sustains me. After this, I went to Pune. It is impossible for me to set down all the reminiscences of this particular time. Gokhale and the members of the Servants of India Society overwhelmed me with affection. So far as I can recollect, Gokhale had summoned all of them to meet me. I had a frank talk with them on every sort of subject. Gokhale was very keen that I should join the society, and so was I. But the members felt that there was a greater difference between my ideals and the methods of work and theirs. It might not be proper for me to join the society. Gokhale believed that, in spite of my insistence on my own principles, I was equally ready and able to tolerate theirs. But, he said, the members of the society have not yet understood your readiness for compromise. They are tenacious of their principles and quite independent, and I am hoping that they will accept you. But if they don't, you will not for a moment think that they are lacking in respect or love for you. They are hesitating to take the risk lest their high regard for you should not be jeopardized. But whether you are family or whether you are formally admitted as a member or not, I am not going to look upon you as one. I informed Gokhale of my intentions, whether I was admitted to the member or not. I wanted to have an ashram where I could settle down with my Phoenix family, preferably somewhere in Gujarat. As being a Gujarati, I thought I was best fitted to serve the country through serving Gujarat. Gokhale liked the idea. He said, "You should certainly do this, whatever may be the result of your talks with the president. You should look to me for the expenses of the ashram, which I shall regard as my own." My heart overflowed with joy. It was a pleasure to feel free from the responsibility of raising funds and to realize that I should not be object to set about all the work on my own, and I should be able to count on a sure guide whenever I was in difficulty. This took a great load off my mind. So the late Dr. Dev was summoned and told to open an account for me in the society's book and to give me whatever I might require in the ashram and for public expenses. I now prepared to go to Shantiniketan. On the eve of my departure, Gokhale arranged for a party of selected friends, taking good care to order refreshments of my liking, fruits and nuts. The party was held just a few places from his room, and he was hardly in a condition to walk across to attend it. But his affection for me got the better of him, and he insisted on coming. He came, but fainted and then had to be carried away. Such fainting was not a new thing with him, and so when he came to, he sent a word that we must go on with the party. The party was, of course, no more than a conversion conversazione in the open space opposite society's guest house, during which friends had a head-to-head chats over light refreshments of groundnuts, dates, fresh fruits of the season. But the fainting fit was to be no common event in my life. Was it a threat? From Pune, I went to Rajkot and Porbandar, where I had to meet my brother's widow and other relatives. During the Satyagraha in South Africa, I had altered my style of dress so as to make it more in keeping with that of the indentured labourers, and in England also I had adhered to the same style of indoor use. For landing in Bombay, I had a Kathiawadi suit of clothes consisting of a shirt, a dhoti, a cloak and a white scarf, all made from Indian mill cloth. But as I was to travel third from Bombay, I regarded the scarf and the cloak as too much of an encumbrance. So I shed them and invested in an 8 to 10 annas Kashmiri cap. Once dressed in that fashion was sure to pass muster as a poor man. On on account of the plague prevailing at that time, third class passengers were medically inspected at Viram or Vadhavan, I forget which. I had a slight fever. The inspector, on finding that I had a temperature, asked me to report myself to the medical officer at Rajkot and noted down my name. Someone had perhaps sent the information that I was passing through Vadhavan to the tailor Motilal, a noted public worker at that time, met me at the station. He had told me about the Virangam customs and the hardships railway passengers had to suffer on account of it. I had little inclination to talk because of my fever and tried to finish with a brief reply which took the form of a question. Are you prepared to go in jail? I had taken Motilal to be one of those impetuous youths who do not think before speaking, and not so Motilal. He replied with a firm deliberation. We will certainly go to jail provided you lead us as Kathiawardis. We must have first right on you. Of course, we do not mean to detain you, but you must promise to halt here on your return. You will be delighted to see the work and the spirit of the youth, and you may trust us to respond as soon as you summon us. Um, Motilal captivated me. His comrade, eulogizing him, said, "Our friend is but a tailor. He's but Our friend is but a tailor, but he's such a master of his profession that he easily earns 15 rupees a month, which is just what he needs, working for an hour a day and gives the rest of his time to public work. He leads us all, putting our education at home. He leads us all, putting our education to shame." Later, I came in contact with Motilal and saw that there was no exaggeration in the eulogy. He made it a point to spending some days in the then newly started ashram every month to teach children tailoring and to do some of the tailoring of the ashram himself. He would talk to me every day of Viram Gam and the hardships of the passengers, which had become absolutely unbearable for him. He was cut off in the prime of the youth by sudden illness, and public life at Vadvan suffered without him. On reaching Rajkot, I reported myself to the medical officer the next morning. I was not unknown there. The doctor felt ashamed and angry with the inspector. This was unnecessary, for the inspector had only done his duty. He did not know me, and even if he had known me, he should not have done otherwise. The medical officer would not let me go to him again, insisted on sending the inspector to me instead. Inspection of third class passengers for sanitary reasons is essential on such occasions. If big men choose to travel third, whatever their position in life, they must voluntarily submit themselves to all the regulations that the poor are subject to. And the officials ought to be impartial. My experience is that the officials, instead of looking upon third class passengers as fellow men, regard them as so many sheep. They talk to them contemptuously and brook no reply or argument. The third class passenger has to obey the official as though he were his servant, and the latter may with impunity belabor and blackmail him and book him his ticket only after putting him to the greatest possible inconvenience, often including often missing the train. All this I have seen with my own eyes. No reform is possible unless some of the educated and the rich voluntarily accept the status of poor, travel third, and refuse to enjoy the amenities denied to the poor, and instead of taking avoidable hardships, discourtesies, and injustice as a matter of course, fight for their removal. Whenever I went to Kathiawad, I heard complaints of the Viramgam customs hardship. I therefore decided immediately to make use of Lord Wellington's offer. I collected and read all the literature available on the subject, convinced myself that the complaints were well founded, and opened correspondence with the Bombay government. I called on the private secretary to Lord Wellington and visited on His Excellency also. The latter expressed his sympathy but shifted the blame onto Delhi. If it had been in our hands, we would have removed the cordon long ago. You should approach the government of India, said the secretary. I communicated with the government of India but got no reply beyond an acknowledgement. It was only when I had the occasion to meet Lord Chelmsford later that the redress could be had. When I placed the facts before him, he expressed his astonishment. He had known nothing of the matter. He gave me a patient hearing, telephoned that very moment for papers about Viram Gam, and promised to remove the cordon if the authorities had no explanation or defense to offer. Within a few days of this interview, I read in newspapers that the Viramgam custom cordon had been removed. I regarded this event as an advent of Satyagraha in India. For during my interview with the Bombay government, the secretary had expressed his disapproval of a reference of Satyagraha in a speech I had delivered in Bagasara in Kathiawad. Is this not a threat? He asked. And do you think a powerful government will yield to threats? This was no threat, I had replied. It was educating the people, and it is my duty to place before the people all the legitimate remedies for grievances. A nation that usually wants to come on its own ought to know all the ways and means to freedom. Usually they include violence as a last remedy. Satyagraha, on the other hand, is absolutely non-violent weapon, and I regard it as my duty to explain its practice and its limitations. I have no doubt that the British government is a powerful government, and I have no doubt also that Satyagraha is a sovereign remedy. The clever secretary nodded his head and said, "We shall see." Okay, I'm going to take a break here because this recording of this video has happened 3 times, so I would have to go a little back and recap it. So what all have we seen today? We've seen that Gandhi was suffering in England from a disease that I cannot pronounce. I have no clue what that means, but he tried his best to get to recover. Gandhi also had this difficulty of not being being stuck by his vow of the diet, and he did not want to break that for any reason. So one was that he had refused to he was taking a complete fruit diet which he had broken, but he was under vow not to drink any kind of milk. Now his doctor, Dr. Jivraj Mehta, had offered a treatment, but his condition was that Gandhi should follow a proper diet. Gandhi did not want to do that. The doctor approached Gokhale. Gokhale tried to reason with Gandhi. Gandhi said that, "Give me 24 hours and I'll think about it." Even after 24 hours, Gandhi felt that it was not right, and he told Gokhale as such. Gandhi therefore did not break his diet of milk, and he continued as he had decided earlier. He of course changed doctors and tried other methods. Some of it worked, but not for long. He tried other methods of his own, and he just kept carrying on with life. Now, because of his not so good health, it was not suggested that he carry on with his war support, and it was recommended that he go back to India. Uh, his plan, any which ways, was to go to India, and his partner for the entire journey was Mr. Kallenbach. Now, Mr. Kallenbach was of German descent, and therefore, for him to get into India, which was at that point of time a part of a colony of the British Empire, would not have been possible. Any which ways, they gave it a try, but the he could not get his passport from England, and therefore he decided instead to go back to South Africa. Gandhi felt it was a pity because he had come to like Kallenbach. Kallenbach and Gandhi were like partners in all their practices of brahmacharya and practices in self-restraint. Kallenbach, of course, was from a fairly well-off background and liked all his possessions. He went back to South Africa and became a good architect. Gandhi felt that that was a pity because if he had come with Gandhi to India, he would have had a much uh, more productive and richer life, richer in the sense of being living simply and making more of life than just making money. Yeah, rather than the rather than the physical richness, intellectual richness is what Gandhi felt that he would have had if he had come with him to India. Now, Gandhi went to India, and that's when the second part of that's when the kind of part 4 got over, and we started with part 5 of the book. Now this is Gandhi's experience in Kathiawar, and there's nothing that is really big here. There's nothing that I possibly want to talk much about. Of course, he went and met Gokhale, and Gandhi talks a lot in this phase about him sticking on to complete truth, right? He goes on to explaining how he would not compromise on, because the profession of a lawyer is seen as a profession where all of them are liars, and Gandhi tries to clarify this, and a lot of people have asked him to talk about it, and he says that he never compromised on his concept of truth, and even if he felt that truth was compromised, he would kind of go away from the case. There was one case where he realized that the information that they had shared was not correct, and he advised his client to share the right information if that sharing the right information would also weaken the client's case. So the senior counsel advised against it. So Gandhi said that he would not have anything to do with it if the client did not admit that the information shared was not correct. The client was somebody whom Gandhi knew very well, and the client had a lot of respect for Gandhi, so he did what Gandhi said. The senior counsel said that if that was the case, he would not fight the case and Gandhi should fight on the behalf of the client. Gandhi did so. The court obviously was a little uh, cynical about the fact that the client had given an information which was not correct, but and one of the judges therefore was quite critical and about it, but eventually the same judge supported Gandhi, for he realized that Gandhi was on the side of truth, and whether the case was completely won by Gandhi for his client or he got his money back is something that Gandhi doesn't remember, but he remembers the case vividly for the fact that he fought for the truth. And when he did that, the news around spread, and most people who approached him therefore knew what they were getting into, even if he had the slightest doubt, as he had in one more case about his client not being honest. He admitted to the court and uh, asked the court to take the necessary action. Uh, the opposition was quite surprised by it, and the client was obviously upset. But the client also knew that Gandhi would not take such cases and respected that. So this was how Gandhi was. He was quite rigid about the fact that he would not uh, take anything which was not the truth, and he would not, as a lawyer, where they had to navigate between a lot of gray areas, he would not compromise on anything but the truth. Uh, what else is there? There's not much that I have missed after that. Yeah, he talks about how because of his uh, because of the way he practiced, many of his clients became co-workers. They were uh, uh, they became his partners and comrades, or his soldiers in his fight of Satyagraha in India. Yeah, that's about it. I guess there's not much happening in this chapter. Um, I would catch up with you in the next reading. Yep. Thank you very much. And if I missed something here, I will kind of recap it in the next video. Uh, if you have any comments, any suggestions, do drop in the comment section, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.